The corridor reeked of burnt copper, industrial bleach, and the unmistakable iron signature of fresh death. Naomi Sears didn't flinch at the smell. She drifted through the red sector at precisely 2:19 a.m., her footsteps absorbed entirely by shadow, as though the darkness itself had swallowed the sound. Dressed in a reinforced obsidian bodysuit layered with a custom-cut coat, loaded with pressure-point needles, and a suppressed compact pistol, she was the Kuroka, the Black Flower, a living weapon the world had spent 15 years pretending didn't exist. Her jet-black locks were bound in a high, severe coil, a sharp contrast against the pale infrared wash of her tactical lenses. She looked like something sculpted from a nightmare, beautiful and catastrophic in equal measure. The 14 men scattered across the hallway floor had never seen her face. They only felt the ghost of displaced air before the lights went out forever. 40 minutes later, the air inside the exclusive Itiwan Sky Lounge smelled of 12-year-old bourbon, black oud, and the warm spice of Marcus Vane's cologne. Naomi entered in a floor-length champagne dress, the fabric catching the light like liquid gold, her locks now down and softly curled, brushing the curve of her collarbone. She moved like a woman who summered on yachts and had never once raised her voice. Marcus Vane, the most quietly terrifying power broker in Seoul's underground, looked up from his drink as she crossed the room. For just a moment, the man who had built an empire on never showing weakness looked stripped bare of all of it. "You missed the first course," Marcus said, his voice low enough to feel like a private frequency meant only for her. And just like that, something imperceptible shifted in the room. Every soldier, every underboss, every scarred man with a gun beneath his jacket lowered his eyes. Not because they had been ordered to. Because of the specific way Marcus Vane looked at this woman, and because some instincts run deeper than rank. Naomi didn't acknowledge the submission rippling through the room. She never acknowledged things like that. She simply walked to Marcus, let 2 fingers rest lightly on the back of his wrist, and smiled. The same easy, devastating smile she had used to distract a consul general 3 seconds before rendering him unconscious. The lounge smelled of burnt copper, industrial bleach, and the unmistakable iron signature of fresh death. But Naomi Sears didn't flinch. To her, it was simply the smell of a job completed ahead of schedule. She moved through the red sector at 2:19 a.m., soundless and certain, every cell in her body operating on the cold, efficient logic of the Kuroka. In her reinforced coat, she carried pressure-point needles, a ceramic garrote looped at her wrist, and a suppressed compact already warm from use. Her locks were coiled tight at the crown of her head, and her expression was the absence of one. 14 bodies behind her, 0 witnesses. The hallway was already fading into memory. She paused at a junction near the east stairwell, scanning the timer embedded in her cuff. Precision was her first language. She turned into a maintenance corridor she had mapped during the reconnaissance phase 2 weeks prior, slipped into the utility room with the ease of someone returning home, and began the transformation. The tactical coat came off. The lenses came out. A silk cloth worked across her hands and neck, lifting the trace evidence of the evening. The woman who emerged from that room 40 minutes later looked like she had never been anywhere near a stairwell. Inside the Itiwan Sky Lounge, the air smelled of aged bourbon, black oud, and Marcus Vane's signature warmth. Naomi entered in champagne, moving like the room had been designed around her. Marcus was at a corner table, 2 small plates of braised short rib already waiting, a candle burning low between them. He rose slightly as she approached, a reflex, not a performance. And the men who served him, the ones who had broken other men without hesitation, dropped their gazes to the floor. "You missed the first course," Marcus said. She smiled and sat. She picked up her fork with a hand that had been perfectly still on a trigger less than an hour ago. The meal steamed gently between them, and for a moment, just one, she let herself exist inside it. That moment dissolved the instant Marcus stood and straightened his cuffs. He didn't ask if she was ready. He extended his hand, and Naomi, the woman who had spent the last hour pretending the night hadn't happened, placed her palm in his. They moved toward the back of the lounge, through a mirrored corridor, into the pressurized silence of what Marcus's people called the war room. The doors opened. 18 men stood arranged in a broad arc, old money and new violence stitched into tailored wool. Their eyes were trained low. Marcus didn't slow until they reached the head of the long matte steel table. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture that looked like devotion and functioned, in this world, like a proclamation. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice settling over the room like weather. "This is Naomi Sears, my counsel, my constant. You will extend her the same trust you extend me." Naomi didn't perform surprise or delight. She leaned into Marcus's side and let her face arrange itself into the portrait of a woman overwhelmed by her man's world, odd, soft, grateful. Behind the expression, the Kuroko was already working. Her eyes moved in a slow, methodical sweep. 4 exits, the main doors, a ventilation panel at 9 o'clock, a secondary door disguised behind a wall panel at the far right, and a floor-to-ceiling window reinforced with laminate that would need a sustained point of pressure to breach. The man to the left near the bookcase was distributing his weight unevenly, a favored side that left his ribs exposed. The bald enforcer by the door had a tell at his jaw when his eyes tracked movement. The gray-suited accountant at the far end of the arc was gripping the folder in his lap with both hands, knuckles pale, which meant a holster under the table, likely cross-draw. She catalogued every hollow, every nerve cluster, every fatal geometry in the room within 45 seconds. To Marcus, she was the most remarkable woman he had ever known. To his men, she was a beautiful disruption. To Naomi, they were problems with solutions. "It's genuinely an honor," she said, her voice shaped into the warm, rounded vowels of a Miami girl who went to a good school and believed in brunch. She offered a single graceful nod. Marcus beamed. And somewhere beneath the silk and the performance, the woman who had been given her first contract at the age of 13 felt the familiar flicker of something she had spent years extinguishing. She smothered it before it could breathe and returned her attention to the panel behind the accountant's left shoulder. If the Kyorican organization sent the order tonight, she would need to move through Marcus first. She held his hand warmly, even as she was calculating the precise angle required to neutralize the man standing directly behind him. The smell of bourbon always pulled her back to cedar resin and cold stone floors. Naomi let her eyes close for one heartbeat, and the war room dissolved into the training compound outside Osaka. She was 11. Her locks had been cut close for efficiency. The mat beneath her knees was worn to the fiber. Master Rin had been a woman of absolute architecture. Everything in her was structure, nothing was ornament. She had not raised Naomi. She had disassembled her and rebuilt her into something that could not be broken. "Feeling," she had said once, pressing 2 fingers to the center of Naomi's sternum with enough force to leave a bruise, "is just interference, and interference gets people killed." The Blossom contract had arrived on Naomi's 24th birthday in a brushed steel case with a biometric lock. The terms were clean and total. Embed with the Vane Syndicate. Become indispensable to the man at its center. Wait for the signal. Sever the operation at the root. In exchange, a new identity, a funded exit, a life lived in daylight, free of the Kyorican's reach. The cost of failure was a body never recovered from the sea. The Syndicate hadn't chosen her only for her lethality. They had 100 operatives capable of violence. They had chosen her because Marcus Vane was known to be a man who was moved by elegance, by warmth, by the specific quality of a woman who seemed entirely at peace with herself. They had trained Naomi for 2 years in the precise performance of that peace. They had constructed her as a door he would want to open. She was the most beautiful trap ever assembled for a man who had survived every other kind. A sharp clink of glassware returned her to the present. She was no longer the girl on the cold floor in Osaka. She was the woman in champagne silk, standing at the center of Marcus Vane's world. She looked at him now, the way he commanded the room without crowding it, the way he spoke to his men like he still remembered being one of them, and the Blossom contract's weight shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. He was supposed to be a profile of liabilities. He was not cooperating with that assessment. The ride back from the war room was in a single private vehicle, no convoy, no performance. Marcus drove them out of the city himself, the towers thinning, and then disappearing entirely into dark hills and the smell of wet pine. The house in the valley was low and traditional, built from pale stone and old timber, with paper screens and a narrow garden still heavy with the smell of drying herbs. "My grandmother's hands built this garden," Marcus said, and his voice had shed the frequency it carried in the lounge. He removed his shoes at the threshold, and in that single gesture, Naomi saw a man she hadn't been briefed on. She followed him inside. She was not mapping the room. She was standing in it. They sat on the open wooden porch as the sky turned amber, and Marcus spoke about a version of himself that predated everything she had been sent to dismantle. A boy who drew buildings in the margins of school books. A son who still knew every inch of his grandmother's garden. He turned to her and tucked a lock gently away from her face, his thumb resting at her temple for a moment longer than necessary. "I brought you here because this is the only place I'm still who I was supposed to be," he said quietly. "I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know that somewhere inside all of this, there's something that doesn't have blood on it." The Kuroko went quiet. The Blossom contract went distant. Naomi closed her eyes and let her head rest against his shoulder and felt, with an alarm she had no training for, that she had stopped performing. She hadn't tracked the last 40 minutes. She hadn't counted exits or measured distances. She had simply been present in a warm, still place with a man who had just shown her the most dangerous thing she had encountered in 15 years of fieldwork. His actual self. The penthouse felt surgical after the valley, glass and ambient light, and the hum of a city that never fully rested. Marcus was absorbed in a call, his voice low and serious from the other room. Naomi moved through the kitchen, the silk of her robe trailing behind her. She reached for a glass of water and felt it, a different kind of attention than she had grown accustomed to. Not warm, not admiring, measuring. D1, Marcus's head of security, stood in the corridor shadow with the stillness of a man who had been watching her for longer than this moment. He was not hostile. He was worse. He was patient. He had been watching her the way a man watches a puzzle he hasn't yet decided whether to solve or destroy. Naomi kept her face soft and domestic, the picture of boredom. As she reached for the bottle, her elbow connected with a tall water glass standing near the counter's edge. It tipped. And before the thought to control herself had even fully formed, 15 years of Kaiorican conditioning moved through her like current through wire. Her hand closed around the glass a full inch before it would have hit the marble. Clean, silent, absolute. The silence after was the loudest thing in the room. She looked up slowly. D1 had not moved, but his eyes had changed shape. "That's a fast catch," he said, quiet and flat, "for someone who told me she was in event planning." Naomi laughed, liquid and unconcerned, pitched exactly right. "My father put a tennis racket in my hand before I could walk. The reflexes never really go away." She set the glass down with a hand she had to consciously steady and smiled like a woman who found the whole thing mildly charming. But the chessboard was now set. For the rest of the evening, D1 tested the perimeter. He dropped his lighter on the tile behind her at a distance that should have made a civilian jump. He moved into her space with the sudden mass of a man used to making other men step back, watching for the instinctive weight shift of someone trained in close quarters. Naomi played the confused, slightly vexed girlfriend at every turn, but the air had changed, and she knew exactly what it meant. Suspicion in this world was not a feeling. It was a timer counting down. The restaurant was all rain-smeared glass and low gold light, the kind of place that cost enough to make silence feel purchased. Marcus ran his thumb across the back of her hand, unhurried. "I'll be 2 minutes," he said, eyes holding hers for a moment past the words. "They always get the garnish wrong on that hibiscus and lychee thing you like." He pressed her fingers once and moved toward the bar. The warmth left Naomi's eyes the instant he stepped out of the candlelight. She was looking at the window. Not through it, at it. In its reflection, a mile out on the crown of the Hana Tower, a small pulse of light repeated in the rain. A scope lens catching weather, finding its target. And the target was the empty seat where Marcus had been sitting. Naomi was moving before the waiter finished turning the corner. She did not use the front of the restaurant. She slipped through the service corridor with her evening wrap in one hand and a ceramic push blade she'd recovered from her clutch in the other, and hit the fire escape at a run. The rain hit her immediately, cold and total, plastering her locks against her neck, turning her champagne dress into something that weighed twice what it should. She moved up the adjacent service structure with the fluid economy of someone for whom vertical surfaces are not obstacles. She did not think about what she was doing or why. She moved. The shooter was settled deep into his position, prone, steady, control breath patterning into the bolt-action rifle, the crosshair hovering over the seat Marcus would return to. He did not hear her. The shadow that rose behind him announced itself only by the change in air pressure. Naomi's technique was precise and unkind. One hand sealed the sound. The blade traveled upward at the exact angle required. The man ceased. She caught the weight before it could shift the rifle and wake anyone with the noise, dragged the body into the dark behind a ventilation block, covered the scene with a heavy maintenance tarp, and assessed herself in a rain-puddle surface. Damp. Intact. Clean. She was back at the table, locks damp at the ends, pulse at 60, when Marcus returned carrying the hibiscus drink with a perfectly placed slice of star fruit balanced on the rim. He set it down with quiet pride and looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the only fixed point in a shifting world. Naomi looked at the drink, then at the man she had just saved from a kill she was originally contracted to carry out herself. She lifted the glass and took a long, slow sip. "You always get it exactly right," she said softly. "Every time." The city rained on the windows of the penthouse, while Marcus slept in the other room, breathing with the total trust of a man who believed he was safe. Naomi stood by the glass, her reflection a pale ghost floating above the sprawling lights below. In her palm, a burner phone, cheap, anonymous, purchased from a street vendor in Mapo 3 months ago, vibrated once, then held the vibration like a sustained threat. She opened it. The screen's cold light erased the warmth from her face. 5 words. "Tonight, or the city burns." The Kyorican were done waiting. She had been in Marcus's orbit for months past the projected timeline, and their patience had calcified into something that didn't resemble patience anymore. She knew what they meant by burning the city. She had seen the infrastructure files, the utility grid maps, the water system schematics, the notes on which residential corridors would be slowest to evacuate. They were not speaking in metaphor. Naomi closed the phone and stood in the gap between 2 lives. To her left, through the cracked bedroom door, a man sleeping in good faith. To her right, on the high shelf behind the art panel, the matte black case she had never once unpacked in this apartment, because unpacking it would have made something real that she preferred to keep abstract. She opened the case. Her hands moved with a detachment that frightened her less than the alternative, the fact that they almost didn't. She dressed in silence. Straps tightened. Blades seated. The champagne dress became the past. She was no longer playing Naomi Sears, the warm-voiced woman from Miami. She was something older and colder, something that had been waiting in the dark below her surface this whole time, confused by the delay. She stepped onto the balcony into the rain. By morning, one of her 2 selves would have to die. The Grand Silla Gala was a gilded theater of controlled menace, crystal chandeliers, vintage wine, and the country's most dangerous people wearing their most expensive faces. Naomi moved through the crowd in a deep burgundy gown the color of a decision that couldn't be unmade, silk that whispered with every step. At the far end of the terrace, under the broad decorative eave, a custom-built rig had been set and calibrated by Kyorican logistics team 48 hours prior, timed to fire beneath the noise of the midnight fireworks display. Marcus was incandescent. He stood at the room's center in a perfectly fitted black suit, relaxed in the way only truly powerful people can be, working a circle of officials with half his attention while the other half kept returning to the room to her. When their eyes met, he moved. He crossed the floor directly, hand finding her waist, pulling her into the slow current of the music. "You look like the whole room is lucky to be near you," he said against her temple. "But your hands are cold, Naomi." "Air conditioning," she said. The words came out hollow. She rested her head against his chest and counted the beats of his heart with the precision she usually reserved for timing detonators. 1, 2, 3. She had been trained to understand the human body as a system of failures waiting to happen. She had spent 15 years finding the seams. But as Marcus moved her through the light, she did not see anatomy. She saw the man who had driven her to his grandmother's house and shown her a garden. She saw someone who had chosen, against everything his life had prepared him for, to try to be good. The fireworks split the sky, violet and white and cascading gold. The signal. Naomi stepped from the dance floor and moved onto the terrace with the controlled urgency of someone who knew the exact location of every object in the dark. She found the rig. She settled behind it. The scope was cold and immediate against her eye, the crosshairs finding Marcus with an ease that her body had built over thousands of hours of conditioning. The world narrowed to the lens. He wasn't watching the fireworks. He was looking toward the terrace, looking for her. His expression was not the face he wore for his men or his enemies or the city that feared him. It was unguarded and searching and entirely his. A ghost has no heart, Master Rin had said. Naomi's hand shifted. The barrel moved 2 degrees. The round left the chamber beneath a burst of red pyrotechnics and took out a chandelier in a cascade of crystal and light. The room erupted, screaming, bodies dropping low, glass raining across the marble in a sound like breaking ice. Naomi let the rig fall and stood in the open terrace in the aftermath, making no effort to run. She found Marcus's eyes through the smoke and the chaos. She had not completed the hit. She had announced the war instead. The shot she didn't take was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. And as D1 closed around his principal in the confusion below, Naomi understood with perfect clarity that she had just placed a target on herself, so that Marcus Vane might live long enough to understand why. The assault came before dawn, coordinated, professional, and thorough. The Kyrikan's retrieval unit moved through the Vane estate like a cold front, clinical and quiet, the same language Naomi had once spoken fluently. She was the error in their calculation now. Inside the reinforced study, Marcus had already overturned the desk and checked his sidearm with the efficiency of a man who had always known, somewhere, that the comfortable years were borrowed. He looked up expecting a terrified civilian. What he saw was the Kuroka. She had shed the evening wear. She stood in matte black, locks coiled back into their operational crown, the expression on her face stripped of every American-inflected warmth she had spent years perfecting. In her right hand, a short blade. In her eyes, the geography of the room already calculated. Naomi, his voice broke the word open. Later, she said, the lilt was gone. Get behind the desk, stay low and don't move unless I tell you. She moved before he could respond. The first operative came through the ceiling panel with a silenced weapon and found nothing where his target should have been, and then found Naomi, which was significantly worse. She was fluid and total, moving through the space like the room was cooperating with her. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She was protecting something now, and that changed the physics of every decision she made. Marcus did not stay behind the desk for long. He was a man who had survived this world before she arrived, and he was not built for waiting. When the study doors came apart at the hinges, he joined the fight with the calm of someone who had made peace with the stakes, and what formed between them was something neither of them had a word for: a synchrony, a rhythm that existed below language. He covered distance while she closed it. He created openings that she moved through without being asked. In the smoke and the spent casings and the flickering light, the Kyrikan's finest operatives discovered that one of their own fighting for something real is categorically different from one of their own following orders. When it was over, the silence felt earned. They stood in what remained of the study, breathing hard, close enough to feel the heat the night had left in each other. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus looked at her, not with fear, not with betrayal, but with the particular focus of a man who is updating his understanding of the world in real time. He had been given the night's answer to every question he hadn't yet asked. The smoke from the estate fire thinned slowly into the gray of early morning. On the terrace of Marcus's private tower, two people stood facing the city as Seoul arranged itself back into ordinary life below them. Marcus's shirt was ruined, his hands still carrying the knight. Naomi stood beside him in a simple white robe, her locks loose and uncoiled for the first time in what felt like years, fraying gently at the ends. No equipment, no performance, nothing between her and the open air. "They won't send another team," she said. Her voice was only hers now, not the Miami warmth, not the operational flatline, something new that was built from both. "The Kyrikan doesn't pursue a ghost who's already announced themselves. The Blossom contract is dissolved. I made sure of it before I came back to you." Marcus turned. The shadow of everything she had kept from him was still visible in his face, but it was moving, being overtaken by something quieter and more durable. He reached out and touched the place where a blade had grazed her jaw during the siege, his thumb resting there gently. He didn't need the biography. He had seen the summary. He had seen her choose. I built everything I have because I decided that control was the only thing that couldn't be taken from you, he said slowly. I had it all mapped out, every contingency, every exit. He looked at her. And then you walked into a room, and I forgot to be careful. Naomi looked at the city, the streets she had once divided into grids of threat and opportunity, now filling with food vendors and school uniforms and the particular noise of ordinary morning. She felt the weight of the ceramic blades lift from somewhere inside her chest. She was not a weapon making a choice. She was a person, standing in the light, aware for the first time in a very long while that the light was for her too. We can't pretend none of it happened, she said. I know. And we can't stay inside it either. I know that too. She leaned into his side, and he pulled her in with the certainty of a man who had decided. No more architecture of control. No more maps designed for survival only. Just the city below, and the sun above it, and the valley in Gyeongnup where she had once noticed, during a reconnaissance walk disguised as a countryside drive, that the persimmon trees were coming into season, and the old stone house at the bottom of the hill had a roof that needed replacing. She mentioned the house. He laughed, a real one, full and unguarded. And as the morning settled over Seoul in long, warm bands of gold, two people who had each believed, for most of their lives, that they were not built for this particular kind of safety, stood together on the edge of a new chapter and let the old ones finally end. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and drop a comment. What scene hit hardest? New chapters drop weekly. Don't miss the next one.